Om Jnana Timirandhasya Jnanam Jana Shalakaya Chakshur Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. This morning, as I was fortunate enough to be able to take darshan, or at least to stand in front of Sri Sri Radha Madhava Ashtashaki Sriman Mahaprabhu, I was struck at the extraordinary beauty of the deities, and how wonderful is Krishna conscious that so many devotees are here happily chanting and dancing in front of deities who have been served with tremendous transcendental affection for so many years by the famous God brothers, not just brothers, God brothers, Pankajanga and Jananivas brothers. So I was reflecting on the sweetness and beauty of Krishna consciousness, which is very much apparent in Mayapur at this time of year especially. Then it led me to think of the contrast with the subject matters of my seminar, which is not very sweet or beautiful, but required. Just like we're reading about Dhritarashtra in Bhagavatam now, that the particular subject matter may not seem very sweet or beautiful, but before we can actually enter into the sweetness and beauty of Krishna consciousness, we have to understand that everything we consider sweet and beautiful in this material world is actually neither sweet nor beautiful, because it blocks attachment to anything material, blocks our possibility of developing attraction to the genuine sweetness and genuine beauty of Krishna. Later on this morning, a devotee expressed surprise that why I was dedicating a whole session to the subject homosexuality and ISKCON, because what's the relationship? There is no relationship. It's just there's no homosexuality in ISKCON. There can't be, because homosexual activity is against the regulated principles. It's like saying alcoholism and ISKCON or something like that. It seems like it shouldn't be an issue. Why do we have to even talk about it? I mean, we don't see that there are hundreds and thousands of homosexuals rushing to join ISKCON. It's an issue because it has been made an issue by certain persons who want to make it an issue. Recently, an association, I don't know how long, maybe a year ago or something like that. What do you think, Bharat? Galva? About a year ago? 1.5 years ago. Galva, which is an acronym for the Gay and Lesbian Vaishnav Association, started to make specious, it must be specious, justifications for homosexuality. Specious, you know what that means? No. It means apparently logical and well-founded, but actually not so. Faulty logic. So they started to make some justification for why there should be special consideration for homosexuals who want to take to Krishna consciousness. And they made some irrelevant points to apparently back up their position. For instance, citing that Arjuna was cursed by Urvashi to be... Well, they didn't cite that actually, they just stated that he took the role of a eunuch. That it was a curse, that wasn't mentioned actually, it was the curse of Urvashi. But that he took the role of Brihannala, a eunuch, so they wanted to point out that this is something, it was accepted in ancient Vedic society that there could be eunuchs. Yeah, actually I didn't think about that. It was a curse of Urvashi. It wasn't considered something very desirable. And they made a few other points like this, which were later adopted and spoken in a lecture by Bhakti Tirtha Swami, one of the sannyasis, GPCs and initiating gurus in ISKCON. Without mentioning Galba, he stated many of their points in a lecture which was also circulated on the internet. Making the same points that they'd made. So it became, it was a lecture which was supposed to address the issues of homosexuals within ISKCON. So he stated there, for instance, that gays are considered auspicious in Vedic society. Here he was, although he didn't state so in the lecture, but he said afterwards that actually he was using the term gay in a very broad term, which no one else has ever previously used it in, to include transvestites and eunuchs and the whole caboozle. You know what that means? No. Spectrum, the whole type of persons with what would normally be considered abnormal sexual tendencies. Although in dictionary parlance, gay means homosexual. Now, actually that Natabari, the word is given there in Chaitanya Charitamrita, means like that, transvestites, and they're called, they're not exactly homosexuals, but they're called to, they may be called for dancing and singing at some occasions, and he stated that Jagannath Mishra called gays to the birth ceremony of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, which is not exactly correct if you go by dictionary definition. I mean, it's not exactly correct, it's wrong. It's actually a misrepresentation. But it was done within the context of a session which was supposed to be sympathetic to homosexuals. So there was that. And then more recently it's become an issue because in many ways the most senior sannyasi active in ISKCON today, namely Hridayananda Goswami, Hridayananda Das Goswami, HDG, has put on the internet a 9,500 word essay giving apparent justifications of why gay monogamy, in other words homosexual marriage, should be accepted within Vaishnava society. Yeah. So it's an issue because it's a very senior member of our society is openly advocating that gay marriage should be allowed in ISKCON. Various reasons are given that Vaishnavas, we have to be compassionate, and we have to help people who are interested in coming to Krishna consciousness. This is a suggestion that just to recognize that such persons, they may not be able to overcome this tendency immediately, but just as heterosexual monogamy is accepted within Vaishnava and within broader society, which is a concession to help people to become gradually detached. So this gay monogamy can also be introduced in the same way. This is the reasoning given. So there is a movement, it's been going on for some time, 1.5 years, to make homosexuality an accepted and normal part of Vaishnava society, as it has become to a large extent in the broader Kami society. Yesterday I was talking about feminism in ISKCON, which parallels. You ever word for feminism in Russian? No, you're lucky. Don't worry, it'll get you soon, if it hasn't yet. As in Karmi society, all these aberrations from what has for many generations been considered the norm are being introduced. And we find that I believe it was at the end of the 19th century, there was an Irish poet and playwright, Oscar Wilde, who was imprisoned for admitting or promoting his homosexuality. It's interesting. He was a poet and playwright. He seemed to be like among ballet dancers and actors, there seemed to be a higher percentage of homosexuals. I never thought of that. So anyway, nowadays, if you speak against, he was speaking for it and he was jailed. Nowadays, if you speak against homosexuality, you run the risk of being put in prison in the same country in England. Last summer in England, I saw something written up on, I don't know, in a telephone booth or somewhere, that Her Majesty's police will not tolerate any racial or homophobic statements. Homophobia is an invented word, which means people who... Sorry, it's not such an easy lecture for you to translate. It's an invented word. You maybe don't have any such word in Russian. So homophobia is a word invented, which means people who feel aversion towards homosexuality, although at least up to, say, 35 years ago or 40 years ago, that was the social norm. That most people, I don't know if it's just a social norm or a psychological norm or an inherent norm, that most people feel or felt a kind of disgust at the very thought. And actually Prabhupada also, he expressed disgust at the very thought of homosexuality. But in Kami society there was a deliberate movement, as there were by feminists over a longer period, and among homosexuals there was a deliberate, planned movement to infiltrate the media and present that actually homosexuality is something quite acceptable and no one should speak against it, and it's come to the extent that it's like that if you're not allowed, it's illegal in many states, in America, if not all of them, I don't know, and in Britain, to express that, to a feeling that I think there's something wrong with it, which is quite surprising because America was founded on Christian principles. I mean, after the
killed most of the Red Indians and taken it over. Then they wanted to found America on Christian principles, and it was considered apparently it's in the Bible, I haven't studied, but at least they claim that in the Bible homosexuality is considered sinful, and it's generally been considered a principle of Christianity that it is considered sinful. But homosexuality is so much the acceptance of the success of the homosexual campaign within maybe just 20 years has changed the whole cultural way of thinking on this, so much so that many priests in Christian churches are now openly professed homosexuals, and there's actually the Christian church is dividing in two on this issue, because some churches, they accept, yes, why not have homosexual priests and homosexual marriages, and others are rejecting, no, we cannot do this. And it's going on right now. It's been going on for the last few months, and it's an ongoing phenomenon that especially the Anglican churches of the world, Episcopal, something like that, they're dividing. They're dividing into two over these issues. So we may think that, well, it's just, what do we worry? I mean, it's not like there's so many homosexuals in ISKCON, or people. It's not that there's so many wanting to join, but undoubtedly, since the campaign by homosexuals to promote homosexuality as being acceptable and normal within human society, whereas previously it was considered unacceptable and abnormal, there have been many more homosexuals. It's like if you advertise something, people get a desire for it, something like that. And as I was saying yesterday, even there are several cases in ISKCON of devotees who have been wives and mothers for many years, and then after their children are grown up, they become lesbians. It's really strange. We may not be allowed to say that for very long. Because, they're making laws that you have to accept this, and they're very strongly enforcing this. The society which says that everyone should be allowed to think as you like and have your own opinion, the liberal society, is very strict in enforcing that you cannot have an opinion opposite to them. You are forced to send your children to school where they must learn about atheistic evolutionary theory. You are now they've brought in legislation that you're more and more in all spheres of life, you're forced to accept their feministic ideas, that women must be given equal opportunities in all situations, and therefore you have the bizarre situation of women being sent to fight in wars, because we're all equal, right? So women should also go and fight in wars. And I was talking about the fire women who can't lift the hose, so they had to change the rules that for admittance into the fire brigade, because they have to allow a same number of women as men, but they're not strong enough to lift the hose, so they had to change the rules. So many bizarre things. So one thing that it seems like they're going to promote also is that by law they're going to enforce that you cannot be against homosexuality, even on religious grounds. And if you don't allow openly professed homosexuals to have all rights, including marriage, then, for instance, they may allow it, but they won't allow, for instance, any religion that stands against that, it's quite likely that they'll start to remove all their tax benefits, and they may impose certain restrictions on them. like that. So it'll make it, in other words, they'll make it very difficult for religious societies to stick to their ancient beliefs on these matters. So this is a very real threat which is facing ISKCON, as all other societies. The threat of government action against societies, religious societies or any other societies that do not accept that homosexual marriage, although previously marriage, there's no idea of homosexual marriage. Marriage means between man and woman. Marriage means it's traditionally marriage in all civilizations. Marriage is not something you get a certificate for from the government, but marriage means it's a religiously blessed activity. It's in the Catholic Church, it's a sacrament. It's considered a sacred act. It's considered an act that binds man and woman together in the eyes of God, so that they can live peacefully together in the service of God and bring forth children in the service of God. So there is no question of because homosexuality is considered sinful, and there's no question of homosexual relations bringing forth children. So no one ever thought of homosexual marriage. But because in the modern age the secular society has converted marriage into an arrangement of convenience for sexual partners with no religious commitment, no religious commitment, no real commitment of any kind. That's why divorce is so prevalent, because marriage is no longer for most people in the Western world, marriage is no longer a religious commitment. It's an arrangement of convenience for sense gratification. And because in the modern age they're promoting sense gratification more and more and more, so homosex comes up, because when you're fed up of women, then when a man is fed up of trying with women, then what's the next thing? You got fed up one way, then try something else. Or as Prabhupada explained, men they have so much sex that they become impotent, and therefore they desire to have sex with men. Whatever it is, it's perverted. We could also say that heterosexual activity is perverted, but according to Shastra, that can actually be a sacred act if it is specifically undertaken for the sake of bringing forth good progeny. Krishna says that sexual activity which is not against the tenets of Shastra, that is a representation of me. So that cannot include homosex. That means sexual activity within marriage for the purpose of begetting enlightened children. So anyway, this is an issue, because it may affect that they may say, well, if you perform marriages in your temples or your churches, then you have to offer the same facilities to homosexuals also to perform marriages. And in some churches they already started doing it. They started performing marriages. Last year in America, there was a spate of homosexual marriages, many performed in churches. So these are symptoms of a society that has lost its moorings, lost its connection to its spiritual basis. The only basis of modern society is sex, how to enjoy in as many ways as possible. So this campaign is there to make homosexuality seem acceptable and normal. Within that campaign has to a large extent been successful in Karmi society. Although there are many people who don't like it actually. Recently in New Zealand, legislation was passed to legalize gay marriage, but there was a backlash from the public because most of the public don't like it. In New Zealand, the most popular sport is rugby football. If you know what rugby football is, you can understand they're a macho kind of people. So the public are against it, but some of the legislators, they have promoted this. In academia, this feminism and gay rights is very prominent in academia, which is dominated by these liberal voices. So they're not in tune with the population, the wider population to a large extent, but they are promoting it and deliberately trying to change the way people think and act. So 2 days ago I was talking about the dangers of devotees interacting with the modern academia. And so yesterday I spoke about feminism and today talking about homosexuality. But these are other reasons why it's extremely dangerous. The modern academia, they tend to be very much promoting all the worst things in society in the name of liberality. We should allow everything that is wrong according to scripture. So it's very bad association. Homosexuality is widely prominent in the modern age because nothing in the modern life this is part of the liberal way of thinking. There's no such thing as sin. To consider something as sinful is just some old-fashioned concept. So if we throw out the idea of sin, then the only measure of what is right and wrong in human society is our own opinions. So homosexuality actually is sinful for the reason, if we want to logically examine it, it's sinful because it is an act of personal sense enjoyment which cannot in any way be offered in service to Krishna. Even not in the modern age, but previously, even there's scope for meat eating within the Vedic culture. Even there's scope for wine drinking. Not fully allowed, but there's scope for it. But there's no scope for homosexuality. It's an activity which has no function but to give pleasure to those of perverted taste, to enjoy that. And it's interesting to see that homosexuality it also has so many diseases, serious diseases, especially AIDS has come up in the modern age, which is associated with it. So the Christians can also note that must be the hand of God. It's a karmic reaction. So, how should we approach this in ISKCON? The topic is not just homosexuality, but homosexuality in ISKCON. Well, what did Prabhupada? how did Prabhupada approach this? Prabhupada had several homosexual disciples. He knew they were homosexual. He didn't condemn them for being homosexual, and he encouraged them in Krishna consciousness, but he told them to get married to a member of the opposite sex, with the understanding that the homosexual appetite is a further perversion of the heterosexual appetite, which can be regulated and purified within a religious marriage. And actually it's interesting, some Christian groups, their approach is that homosexuality, the homosexual tendency, it's a psychological disease, and they preach to people that you can be saved from this by Jesus. And there are certain Christians who have written that I used to be a homosexual, but by the grace of Jesus I'm now married and have children. So that's an interesting approach. Prabhupada seemed to have the same kind of approach, that it's something that Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. I have the other mic. So this was Prabhupada's suggested approach. Interestingly, Prabhupada did comment on the notion of gay marriage. He was informed that a report had come in Watchtower magazine. Watchtower magazine is a magazine of the Jehovah's Witnesses. They're in Russia also. You know how to say that in Russian. So the Jehovah's Witnesses had pointed out in their Watchtower magazine the degradation of certain mainline Christian denominations, inasmuch as at that time, back in the 1970s, they wanted to recognize homosexual marriage. And Prabhupada several times noted this as a symptom of the spiritual death of Christianity. That Prabhupada noted this as being such an obvious example of irreligion in the name of religion, that for Prabhupada there's no need to explain it further. This in itself, Prabhupada was noting, made it clear that Christianity is finished, as Prabhupada said. There's no Christianity. If they're advocating such a disgusting thing in the name of religion. There are many quotes from Prabhupada. How he he wrote right in the Bhagavatam purport that the homosexual appetite of one man for another is what is that he wrote? I just forgot it. Demoniac, yes. It's demoniac. It's a demoniac tendency. So Prabhupada is very clear about this. So it's there may be various arguments given. Even Hridayananda Maharaj has given various arguments apparently based on Shastra, but again, if we examine, as some of our devotees are in the course of doing so, they're somewhat, again, specious arguments. But there may be arguments why it is a good idea to it's a sign of progress for ISKCON, or that we're becoming more compassionate, or helping a certain section of society. And it may be said that yes, homosexuals, they may also take to Krishna consciousness. Prabhupada wasn't against that. But to say that homosexual marriage could or should be allowed goes directly against Srila Prabhupada's judgment on this issue. Prabhupada has already discussed it and given his verdict. So, what is at least as dangerous as the proposition that this should be accepted in society, in Vaishnava society, is the fact that devotees want to present arguments to come to a conclusion which is absolutely opposite to that given by Srila Prabhupada, by giving their own logic based on Shastra, apparently based on Shastra. Then why call Prabhupada your Guru? Guru is he who explains Shastra to us and gives the conclusion on various issues. So if Prabhupada has very clearly given one conclusion, and we take out some quotes from Shastra and interpret them in this way and that way, and come to a different conclusion than Prabhupada, then at least as dangerous as the proposition that homosexual marriage should be allowed within Vaishnava society, at least as dangerous is the proposition that we have the right, now that we've become very intelligent, we're no longer hippies, now we're very intelligent, and we have the right to interpret Shastra and come to different conclusions than that given by Srila Prabhupada. So, along with appreciating the beauty of Sri Sri Radha Madhava, we should understand that there are some very serious challenges facing ISKCON from within, and we may think, well, that's not possible that there could be homosexual marriage within ISKCON. But as to date, that article by Hridayananda Maharaj came out on the internet 2 months ago, and the GBC meetings have come and gone, and no one from the GBC has said anything against it. And according to the well-known saying, Monam Sammati Lakshanam, silence is a sign of acceptance. So it seems that the rest of our leaders, with the exception of Dhanavya Goswami, who's written rebutting, what's the word? Rebutting? Refuting or opposing, anyway. Hridayananda Maharaj's theories. But mostly our leaders are silent on this. So, as another saying goes, bad things happen when good people let them happen. They don't say anything against it. How come in Germany Hitler was able to take over? Was everyone in Germany so bad that they agreed with Hitler? Well, there were some people who protested against him. They got killed. That not exactly killed, but we see that within our society, those who openly oppose feminism, they are killed in the sense that of very strongly rebuked and called, like I was saying, misogynist, called woman hater and all this kind of thing. So, according to the liberal opinions, you're allowed to believe anything, but if you don't believe what we say, then you become the subject of massive protest and name calling, which is maybe one reason why our leaders, they don't want to get involved in controversies. It's easier to chant Hare Krishna and be happy, but in the meantime, devotees are reading all these things on the internet, and it's coming from top leaders of our society, and it seems to be it might seem to be very reasonable, and there's quotes of Shastra and this and that, and no one's opposing it, and you may think, well, that's okay. And within a short time, it may very well be that you'll be invited to a marriage between Bhakti John and Bhakti Jim. Or maybe they'll be initiated also. To be held. They'll have to calculate the auspicious time for holding the marriage. How can there be an auspicious time? The whole thing is inauspicious. In marriage, you have to calculate the auspicious time, but how can you calculate an auspicious time for an inauspicious activity? So, it could happen. Beware. According to Srila Prabhupada, he saw that gay marriage was being allowed in Christian religion. He saw that means they're finished. They have no spiritual life. They have not even a semblance of spiritual life left. So, it's all coming. In the name of being fair and being compassionate. So it's said that if you don't agree with this, you're not being compassionate. But we have to judge on the basis of Shastra. You may say that Prabhupada wasn't compassionate, but he was compassionate. He accepted homosexuals can be devotees, but they can't be active. They cannot, if you have that tendency, we don't say don't chant Hare Krishna, but if a homosexual wants to take initiation, then they should think about it 1,000 times, 1,000,000 times, because there is no option for practicing homosexuality within the vows of Krishna consciousness. It's outside the four regulated principles. With the heterosexual tendency, there is allowance. But with the homosexual tendency, there isn't. So, we don't hate homosexuals. If you please come, chant Hare Krishna. You're welcome. We want everyone to come. But there's no scope for practicing or being active within Krishna consciousness. Within the Grihastha ashram, one can become purified and gradually develop renunciation. There's a system given in Shastra, but there's no such system for homosexuality. One cannot become purified by a homosexual relationship. Otherwise, Vyasadeva would have given such an allowance. He's Trikalagya. He compiled the Shastras for people in the future also. But he didn't make any such allowance. Certain things can be dovetailed or allowed in Krishna consciousness, and some things can't. So if we say that, well, if someone has a certain tendency, so we should allow them to indulge in it, then as well as having Galva, Gay and Lesbian Vaishnava Association, we could also have Balva, Beef and Lamb Vaishnava Association. Why not? Or we could say, well, I've got this smoking habit, it's very difficult to kick. No problem, just go on smoking and chant Hare Krishna. We might even, well, we wouldn't say no problem, we'd say, alright, you can't give up smoking immediately, chant Hare Krishna. At least chant Hare Krishna. But you should understand that this is something to be overcome. It's not that you can go on with this and actually become purified. So certain activities are allowable and certain aren't. Another observation that's very interesting is that in Karmi society, in all areas and in all countries, this women's rights movement has come up, that women should have exactly the same rights in all respects as men, and there should be no differentiation And even I've heard in some American universities, in the students' dorms, they have what do they call it? No, co-ed is one, but bathrooms. What's it called? Co-ed. Well, they have multisexual or bisexual bath. In other words, when you go to the shower, there's not one for men and for women, but it's for all for one and one for all. So, cat and dog life. So the women's rights movement is always followed closely by the gay rights movement. They go together. The women's rights movement, usually it's headed up by lesbians, and after bringing, in the Karmi society I'm saying. So, the same thing's happening in ISKCON. First there was a movement that there should be no discrimination on any basis whatsoever between men and women, which we don't find in Shastra, or tradition, or in Prabhupada's books, or in Prabhupada's practice. And that's also been followed by the gay rights movement. And it's the same thing. If you don't agree with that women and men should be treated in exactly the same way in all ways, then you're considered an evil person, hater, a fanatical hater of persons. Although actually, the worst thing for women in general over the last 100 years has been the women's rights movement. It's their own worst enemies, those who are promoting this. They've destroyed the traditional roles of women, which help them within their psychophysical capacities to actualize themselves, as the common word is saying, within the natural role given to them as wives and mothers. But now they consider it demeaning to be wives and mothers. So it's the same thing in Karmi society and within Christian churches and first of all they bring in feminism, and it's followed by the gay rights movement. So feminism has been successful in ISKCON, and the logical conclusion, going by what goes on in what has happened in Karmi society and is presently going on in the Christian churches, is that homosexuality will be considered normal and acceptable. The way things are going, looks like that's the way the future is, just for your information. Sad, but apparently true. And like I say, there's senior members of our society are promoting it, and the leadership of our movement to date has not said anything against it or taken any action. So the writing is on the wall, as they say. But according to Srila Prabhupada, if this does become allowed, then there won't be any spiritual suffering. It'll be a sign of the absolute spiritual bankruptcy of our movement. So on this portentous note, you don't know what portentous means. It means an indication of something bad to happen in future. On this portentous note, I'll finish here. It's a little early, but anyway, if there are any questions, please go ahead.
So we know that the feminists already, they have a movement within ISKCON to change Prabhupada's books, to take away...
Yeah, to change Prabhupada's books. I didn't mention that yesterday, actually. There are certain feminist scholars within our movement have recommended that Prabhupada's books be edited or footnoted, so that statements such as that women should be submissive to men, they are less intelligent, they should be edited out or explained away. These things have been going on for some time. That's an important point which I didn't mention yesterday. Yeah, you can. But if you want to write it down on a piece of paper, then I can read it out. We've been taking questions. We've been taking on pieces of paper so that we don't have to. Yeah, any questions, please put on a piece of paper and give here. Can I have some more water, please? One thing about the liberal ethos is that within certain limits you're allowed to say what you like, so maybe I won't get thrown out of ISKCON for giving this seminar. Not yet. Could you please write it down? All right, say it, and could everyone else write down, and we'll take some verbal. You were saying verbal.
His position of GBC to this issue of homosexuality, that they are not saying anything against this article of...
Well, they might do in future, we don't know, but so far they haven't, which means it doesn't seem to be a burning issue for them. It doesn't seem to be a top priority. Actually, I must admit, I'm saying all these things, it's deliberately provocative. So I'm trying to get some kind of reaction from someone. Yeah. My experience is that unless you poke, there's no reaction. If you pat, there's no reaction. You have to poke, and then you get smashed on the head. But at least it's some kind of reaction. In the Bhagavatam class I gave 3 days ago, in the Prabhupada wrote that, exactly what are the words? One should live according to the principles of righteousness, even at the expense of one's own life. We should live by that principle. We like to hear stories of how, for instance, Ramanujacharya and his disciple Kuresh risked their lives for saying that only Vishnu is supreme, not Shiva. We like to hear stories and say very nice, but if we should also live according to principles, not just talk about it. You were asking?
I professed my ignorance. I didn't know who these women academics.
Well, there's one
What is the question?
lady, she wouldn't like to be called a lady. She's become quite famous, not for for her media presence. Her name is Madhusudani Radha. She'll probably be quite happy that she's getting this mention here. But she especially has been very active in promoting women's rights and gays' rights, and she's also been extremely offensive to Srila Prabhupada, to Lord Ramachandra for his abandoning Mother Sita, which myself and some of my godbrothers brought this to the attention when it came to our notice. I mean, directly, openly, clearly blasphemous. This was brought to the attention of the GBC EC over a year ago, and despite our hammering on them for weeks, they eventually, first of all, they didn't do anything. And eventually they agreed to do something at this GBC meeting, and I believe they formed a committee to look into it. Although according to what Prabhupada wrote in the Nectar of Devotion, one should be extremely intolerant of blasphemy of the Lord and His devotees. So when we're not extremely intolerant of blasphemy of the Lord and His devotees, then we can expect all inauspiciousness. In Bengali, maybe in other languages of India also, there's a saying, Daksha Yagya, which means Daksha Yagya, which means a big fight. So the Daksha Yagya, that big fight came about because Lord Shiva was blasphemed and no one said anything. And look at the result. So mostly devotees, they don't know about this, and it would be nicer if you could all just chant Hare Krishna and be happy, and we all could. But one unfortunate symptom of the modern age in ISKCON is that all issues are public issues. Actually, civilized people, they solve their difficulties privately, but now everything's on the internet. And everything's put out there, and the internet is a means of promoting all kinds of bogus ideas. So everything's public. I mean, Hridayananda Maharaj brought out his magnum homopus on the internet. He didn't consult with GBC members. What do you think? Is this right or is it there? He's appealing to the public, to the world public. So then we have to bring it to the public to re-educate them, or what's the word, disabuse them of the wrong ideas that are being promoted. Everything's out in public. It's gata level. But we have no choice but to bring it to the public. Personally, I've always had not very close, but nice relationship with Hridayananda Maharaj, and I hope to have an ongoing one in future, although on an issue as contentious as this, it's going to definitely put a serious strain on the relationship. But again, our principles and our dedication to Srila Prabhupada and his teachings has to come first. Is anyone trying to edit out the anti-homo statements in Prabhupada's books, as they're doing with the anti-feminist statements? Well, Hridayananda Maharaj himself has reinterpreted that whole verse and purport according to his own knowledge of Sanskrit. I don't think there's the movement to edit Prabhupada's books it's kind of lost. It was stronger. It was about 4 or 5 years ago. We don't hear so much talk about it. I think that one ran into the brick wall of Jayadvaita Swami and Dravida Prabhu. So maybe they're waiting for the next generation or something. They're maybe trying to educate the present generation so that in the next generation. That's what happened. Was that the feminist movement? What happens is you capture the minds of the young women and the young men also. It's not that only women are feminists, men are feminists also. And then they grow up and they become the ruling generation. And they implement everything. So it may be that it may take some time, but the educational system in ISKCON, it's very much linked up with the establishment academia. So you see courses in Radha Desh on sociology and what is it? Management principles. I mean, sociology can also come in Krishna consciousness, but I haven't checked. But I might suspect that they're teaching according to karmi curriculae. So as I was talking about the influence of the modern academia, so the education is being the educational establishment in ISKCON is dominated by devotees who profess to these what might be called liberal ideas. So they have a program, they have an agenda. Education in ISKCON should be strictly according to Prabhupada's books. And for most devotees. And then further education, if anything more, there may be some devotees who specialize deeply in Shastra for the sake of meeting, discussing and combating with other sampradayas, for instance, with Mayavadis. But definitely this modern psychology which is being promoted for some reason or other in modern ISKCON, it's demoniac. It's based on Freud and all his rascal there. We have psychology. Anyway, I spoke about this the other day. It's the psychologists and sociologists in mundane academia who are they're the main promoters of feminism and gay rights. They're probably among the most degraded people in the world in their own personal habits. But somehow, some of our devotees think that this is what ISKCON really needs. What we really need is to understand Prabhupada and his teachings. Guru Mukha Padma Vakya Chitete Korea Aikya Arna Koriho Mone Asha. That's what we really need. Okay, if there's no more questions. There is a question. Wait a minute, I have something. Okay.
We are watching ISKCON to see how they're proceeding.
Sorry, who said that?
Calvin. Calvin stated that we are watching to see how ISKCON is proceeding with the women's issues, to see how we will proceed. And if you create a special interest group, whether it's women's rights or homosexual rights, you open yourself up to
every
legal problems. In other words, legal lawyers. Because for the last 30 years, I was not taken care of as a woman. I was not treated properly as a homosexual in this time.
Yeah. These are very heavy things. Very heavy things. In America, they almost destroyed. There was a threat to destroy our movement with the Gurukuli thing, and there's no end to it. I could also say I was abused. I could go to a court and say I was abused. I was taught that marriage is bad. Then I took sannyas and I spoiled my whole life. I could sue the ISKCON. I could probably make a case. Really, I'm not joking. They taught me all this thing. Actually, in this ISKCON Communications Journal, there came an article a few years ago by Radha Devi Dasi, who is a lawyer, and she examined the position of women according to the standard of the United Nations Human Rights Charter, not according to Shastra. So they're measuring by the Kami's yardstick. All dangerous, as if the United Nations Human Rights Charter is something that has any value whatsoever. It's humanism, which is atheism. Why measure against the United Nations Human Rights Charter? We should measure against the standard of Shastra. But if we see the standard of Shastra, then what are the standards? Kunti Devi, Sita Devi, Mandodari, Shakuntala, Savitri. These are the women who are lauded in Shastra as the great personalities. But in modern India, the feminist influences, they're pumping money into the third world, into the educational institutions to promote feminism. Prabhupada said this feminism is a trick by the men to cheat women, because the men can enjoy women freely. They think we're all free, but the women are left holding the baby, and then the government has to pay. But what's happening is that women, they instigate divorces, and especially in the Western countries, the alimony payments, so they strip the men of all their money. And there are many cases of men who rich men who've worked hard and built up their money, and then a woman marries them, and as soon as they get a child, they divorce them, they make a case and they strip them of everything they've got. They marry them with the specific purpose of getting a child, and as soon as they get a child, they rob them through the court. So many crazy things going on. Mad society. It's a demoniac society. Why should we subscribe to the values of a demoniac society? That means that we've become demons, actually. We don't have faith in Prabhupada and Shastra. There's another question. Just to clear up something regarding H.T. Jesus' essay, was he advocating ISKCON recognized gay marriage or recommending that gays live in a monogamous as opposed to a polygamous atmosphere? No, he didn't say marriage, but he said that we should give allowance for gay monogamy within Vaishnava society. So he wasn't recommending that gays don't sleep around, stick to one partner. He wasn't saying that. He was saying that we should recognize that we should encourage gays to live in a monogamous relationship, and that some recognition should be given to that. In other words, to normalize it and make it acceptable. So, Hare Krishna. We can finish there? No? You have more to say? Okay, right?
Well, because it seems like we're left hanging, so as you mentioned the internet. Is that not all
Sorry, I couldn't hear because so. Why don't you write it down like everyone else? No paper. Okay. All right, please come. Sorry. Come over here. Speak in the mic. Let's see. Can you lean in that far? You got a loud voice.
Yeah. So not all disciples are pleased with what's going on. Usually this is, if you're on a radio show, they say don't mention .coms. But if you want to know the issues that are going on in the Krishna conscious, Shastric, giving Shastric basis, just like Maharaj is saying, there is a dialogue going on, presenting the Krishna conscious side on Siddhanta.com. It was a disciple of Hridayananda Maharaj, still is, but it's like that right now.
They're philosophically opposed.
Because of these issues, yes.
Yeah, there is a weblog, Siddhanta.com. He was with me in India for a few years. He was editing my books. No, but Krishna Kirti, he's not just a clone, you know. You can understand from his writings, he's an actual Brahmin in the sense that he's an independently intelligent person. And I didn't actually drill him with all this stuff because this stuff wasn't so prominent when he was with me. He came to his own conclusion, and he saw, living in India, he saw enough of the traditional way of life to understand that this is superior to what he was brought up with. What about all of you? A few of my brahmachari disciples are here. I've brought over from the West, as Prabhupada wanted that Western devotees could come to India and see and learn about the culture. I mean, India's culture's gone down a lot, but I think all of you here, like Jagannath Mishra, Giridhari, Nityananda, I think you can understand, you can say otherwise if you like, but I think you can understand that you've learned by being in India many things about actual culture as composed to the cat-dog culture of the West. What do you think? Balaram? Think it's been a valuable experience living in India? Prabhupada wanted that. There's more, dear Krishna. So, if possible, if you Prabhupada wanted devotees to come and spend time in India. That doesn't just mean hanging out at the ice cream parlor at the cafe in the Dham, but actually to spend some time, even in some ways away from the Dham is better, because in the Dham there's lots of Western devotees, and you tend to make your own little international bubble. But to go and travel and meet people and interact with them, it's a very valuable cultural experience. How long were you there with me, Jagannath? A few months?
A few months, 2 times.
Yeah. felt you got something valuable from that, apart from me shouting at you.
You see the real India by this coming years thing.
Right, you have to spend some time going around. It is valuable. Not everyone can do it. As a small commensuration, I've written a book called Glimpses of Traditional Indian Life, which tries to give some idea of what I've seen and learned in all these years.
Maharaj, when I first heard your lecture the first day, I thought that the leaders should actually be sitting here listening to this, the leaders of our movement. And I wonder, is there many leaders that are actually listening to your seminars?
I doubt it very much. The question is, are leaders of our movement listening to these seminars? And the answer is, I doubt it very much. Within our movement among the GPCs, there are quite a few who sympathize with this kind of outlook, but not loudly enough. They're not taking a stand on the issues. It may be that they're afraid also of like legal backlash and all this kind of thing. We're actually dealing with very delicate issues because, like I was saying, there are moves to make the traditional religious outlook on various social issues either illegal or penalized, given heavy, just like removing tax concessions for persons who maintain such standards. So we'll have to see. Recently I was in Bangalore, which was traditionally one of the most conservative cities in India. Although recently it's become maybe the most degraded. It's a competition. Delhi, Bangalore. I think Bombay's pretty much up there too, but anyway, that's not really the subject of the talk. Bangalore is very degraded. I mean, not by Western standards, but they're trying their best. They're not very good. Indians aren't that very good at being very degraded, but they're trying their best. Anyway, there's some controversy going on there. And what had happened was, it was a complex situation. I'll just speak some of the, I don't even know all the complexities myself, but there was some situation in which the wife of one devotee, she's also a devotee, had initiated divorce proceedings against her husband on the behest of her guru, who's American and lives in America. And I was asked my opinion about this. I said, no, whatever complaints she may have, divorce is sinful. We don't approve of it. But she was supported by the temple authorities, and I don't know all the details, but anyway, she might have been right in some ways. As I say, I don't know all the details, but the fact that I would never encourage a woman to divorce her husband, or vice versa for that matter. I mean, there may be some, even in Shastra, there are some cases where it's allowed. For instance, if a woman marries a man and then found out that he's impotent, she's allowed to leave him. That's according to Shastra. Or if she finds out he's a homosexual, she's something like that. There are grounds, but because you don't agree with him, or even if he becomes a drunkard or a womanizer, the traditional duty of the wife is to stick with him and just either tolerate or try to make him better or whatever, but we don't leave him. And if we encourage that, oh well, in this case it was a very bad, he was very bad, this, that, they'll say always. Somehow it always seems to be the man's fault. So, and they say, oh yeah, okay, so we sympathize and it's an exception. But then every case becomes an exception. In every case there's always some bad dealings. So where's the end of it? Therefore, there is no divorce in Vedic culture. If someone comes to Krishna and says already divorced, oh, I don't know what to do, Make the best you can. We don't condemn you. We've all done so many sinful activities, but within Vaishnava society, once we start allowing it, or in this case where we can allow it, and then there'll be another case and another case, and then it will become normal. And then there's no family life, and then it's just cat and dog life. So, Hare Krishna. Another question? 2 questions? Yeah. You can?
I have problems in understanding if Guru is one, as Prabhupada explained. Guru is one.
Guru is one. So why do different Gurus in ISKCON have different opinions? Guru is one means that they follow Vyasa, they follow Shastra. The actual truth is one. So it may be that there may be different outlooks on the same subject, which are both acceptable within the parameters of Shastra. Even Mother Yashoda's outlook on Krishna consciousness is different to Radharani's. They're both right. But there are certain parameters in which it can be said that someone has deviated. That we have to see. There are so many Upper Sampradayas which came out after Lord Chaitanya. So they all chant Hare Krishna and they say we're following Lord Chaitanya, but according to those who are actually following Lord, those who are Rupanuga, they recognize what is Rupanuga Viruddha Apasiddhanta. You know what that means? It means the wrong conclusion which is against the teachings of Rupa Goswami. This comes in the pranam mantra to Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. Namaste Gauravani Shimurtaye Dinatarine Rupanuga Viruddha Apasiddhanta Dvanta Harine. He's glorified as one who removes the darkness of the wrong conclusions that are opposed to the correct conclusions of Rupa Goswami. Because he is non-different from Gauravani. He is Gauravani. And he's the uplifter of the fallen souls. So, you'll all have to decide. You'll have to use your God-given, either you can blindly follow, or you can use your God-given intelligence to actually understand what's in Prabhupada's books. Prabhupada said, if you want to know me, read my books. In a way it's good, because maybe devotees will be forced to actually start studying Prabhupada's books. Try to understand the philosophy seriously. Instead of just thinking, well, I'll just follow, but then you're given a choice. What does it mean to follow? Different leaders within our movement are professing different things, what it means to follow Srila Prabhupada. So then we'll have to see. Anyway, it's very clear that Prabhupada was totally rejected the idea of homosexual marriage being ratified by religious edict. So to attempt to introduce it it's a no-brainer, as they say. It's pretty straightforward that it's not what Prabhupada wanted. Hare Krishna. All glories to His Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada.